So welcome everyone to Portland Ovations Week of New Year, New Works conversations around our recent commissions of 5 new works by Maine artists. And we're really thrilled to continue being able to commission and present Maine-based artists, which Ovations has a long history of. As Amy mentioned, I'm Sarah Coleman. I'm the Director of Engagement at Portland Ovations. And just a few housekeeping things. Today's event is auto-captioned and ASL interpreted. So many thanks to American Sign Language interpreter Meryl and USM interpreting student Chandler Guptill for their work. And if you need any support in these things, please feel free to use the chat to connect with us. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that the places where we gather, dance, and sing is ancestral Wabanaki land. And we wish to pay respect to the Abenaki, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, and their elders past, present, and future. And land acknowledgements are about bringing awareness, but they are by no means an endpoint, which is a nice segue into our conversation today and our fourth work that we're talking about. But this one looks a little bit different than the other ones in that it's still in the very, very beginning stages. And we have built a partnership with the Abbe Museum, which is located in Bar Harbor. And together we will be developing a performance that centers Wabanaki stories, storytellers, and culture geared towards young audiences, so our schools and our families. And I just want to say that we are so thrilled to be working with the Abbe. The Abbe was founded in 1926 as a small trailside museum in Acadia National Park, focused on the history and culture of the Wabanaki people. And if you know anything about their history, today they are known for their commitment to center Indigenous people in their histories and stories and futures, really working to correct harmful representations of the past while realizing the values of decolonization and in all its practices, and really are leaders in that work. And it's really wonderful to be partnering with them. And today I'm going to be talking with Starr Kelly, who is their curator of education. So Starr, welcome.
Hello, Sarah, and hello, everybody. My name is Starr. I'm a citizen of Kitigan-Zibi Anishinabek, which is a First Nation community up in Canada. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm really thrilled to be speaking with you today. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Well, I have a bio here that if you are feeling shy about, I won't read. So maybe what I'll do is I'll start by asking you to share a little bit more about yourself and your work and also your work at the Abbe. And then if I feel like there are great things that you left out, I will add them back in.
Yes, please do. I'm sure I'm forgetting things, but like I said, I am a citizen of Kitigan-Zibi Anishinabek. It's an Algonquin community up in Canada. And I'm really happy to be here. I just wanted to say that again because having grown up in Portland, it's really exciting to be able to continue to give back to a community that helped to raise me. I graduated from Portland High School, and I'm really proud to be from that area and to consider that one of my homes, one of my many homes, I would say. And just thinking about who I am and what I wanted to share with the audiences today, I wanted to talk a little bit about who I see myself as in this world and talk a little bit about my work and how important it is to my identity as a person. At my most core level, I would describe myself as an educator and an artist. Being an educator professionally and even privately is a huge part of my identity and always has been. I've been really fortunate enough to pursue my curiosity of educational studies and get a degree from an institution that placed an emphasis on educators developing their pedagogy and teaching philosophy. And this is really thoughtful heart work, really meaning work that comes from the heart, that forces educators to look inward and out at the implications of our work in the classrooms and beyond the classroom. And it was during this really pivotal time in my life that I started developing an approach that I refer to as a curriculum for dignity. And as an educator working in social studies classrooms, I've really been concerned about the dignity of my students, but also about about the dignity of the people in our content. So really looking for those voices that have been silenced in traditional textbooks. And so I base my educational philosophy in social justice and decolonizing practices. And this work continues to guide me in today. And as I shifted into museums and museum education, it really has taken on a life of its own. It's much like the American educational system, museums are colonial institutions, and I've found myself asking central questions about the purpose of museums and how these spaces can be transformed, especially for Indigenous peoples. Museums, by and large, are still not welcoming to Indigenous people and remain the temples of colonial looting and remain to be the authorities of our stories. And my work at the Abbe Museum really seeks to combat this traditional museum practice. And it's not easy work, you know, there's not a guidebook to doing this work, but it's really necessary work and it's very rewarding on a personal level. And now more than ever, I really see the potential of museums. I see us as being places of memory. I see us as being places of dialogue and community gathering. In these spaces, these are the spaces that we need to address and heal from historical trauma and reassert our authority over our own narratives as Indigenous peoples. So that's a little bit about me. If you have any other questions, though, about me or the Abbe Museum, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you, Starr.
Yeah.
Yes, folks, if you do have those, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll say that my first experience and opportunity to learn from you was at a professional development workshop that you led, initiated by Fiona Hopper in the Portland Public Schools. And I was just so inspired by your knowledge and your pedagogy and your presence. And I think all three of those things coming together as a former educator to be able to see you model that is so valuable and so essential to moving through some of the things you're talking about around decolonizing our classrooms. And, you know, you talked about this idea of creating a guidebook, which I actually, and that there is no guidebook, right? And I think actually that's a really nice segue also into the partnership that we have and talking more about that. I wanted to provide a little bit of context for our audience around what it is that this work that we're talking about, because like I said, it doesn't really exist yet. It's in the conversational stages. But from our perspective at Ovations, in addition to employing Maine artists and adding to the canon of work, we wanted to present Wabanaki stories and culture on stage for a couple of reasons. One, to increase non-Indigenous young people's understanding of those communities from themselves, right? Not as somebody else telling that story. Also for young Indigenous people, particularly Wabanaki folks, to see themselves on stage and maybe outside of their own communities as well. And then also to address the gaps in the curriculum within schools around Native Maine studies and doing that through the arts in particular. So I think you and I can talk a little bit more about LD 291 later on, which is guiding some of this. But that's a little bit of the frame of where we were coming from in approaching you all in this partnership. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about why it's really essential that we be in partnership together, particularly as a non-Indigenous institution is commissioning the work and making sure that it really supports the culture and the artists that we are commissioning.
Absolutely. Partnership is at the heart of this project. Like, I really see that and I see the value in that, and it's really unique. We are also a non-Indigenous institution, and you know, the Abbey has decades of experience partnering with Wabanaki artists and storytellers, and I'm eager to bring that to this project with Portland Ovations. And since we've been doing this for so long, we have a lot of insights to share in the commissioning of art like this, and especially in the educational materials that will be developed, so that we're in service to Wabanaki communities, but also in service to districts throughout the state. And we offer a decolonizing approach to this work that really and truly centers Wabanaki voice and meaningful collaboration so that the storytelling itself is appreciated as a true art form and an essential aspect of Wabanaki philosophy. And it's not lost on me that these stories and traditional ways of knowing were historically targeted by the federal government and by the state of Maine. And we shouldn't underplay how important and sensitive it is to bring these quite literally center stage. And before we can get to the point of celebrating the artistry of Wabanaki storytelling, there does need to be frank discussions and prep work done ahead of time with artists so that they're setting their own boundaries and are true decision makers in the process. And we have a lot of experience with that at the Abbey, creating educational content, but also exhibits. And so that's what we hope to bring to this project to really help with some of those initial conversations and to help really set the stage for something truly unique and that I don't think has been done quite like this before in the state of Maine. So I'm really excited to see what happens through this partnership.
Thanks. Yeah, I've just really enjoyed our conversations and they're slow going in a great way, right? We're like, oh wait, maybe we need to back up and we need to learn more, or we need to figure out how to move through this problem a little bit differently. And you alluded to this just in your response there about the role of these stories and storytellers in Wabanaki and Indigenous communities. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, about like this idea of them as a philosophy and their sacredness within your communities for folks who aren't familiar with the role those play.
Absolutely. Stories are an essential cornerstone of Indigenous communities. And I've traveled quite a bit, and I have never been to a Native community that doesn't have a robust and rich storytelling tradition. Though I will note that these traditions are really diverse and they vary widely. But it's clear that for our communities, our stories are intimately tied to our identities and who we see ourselves as. And if I were to really kind of narrow down what are some of the most important aspects of Indigenous communities, I would say language and stories are probably really fundamental blocks that we build our identity around. I also think it's important to note that storytellers themselves are diverse. They all have their own styles when it comes to how they interact with listeners and with audiences, and it's something to celebrate those types of diversity in our storytellers. And in Native communities, our stories are our history, they're our memories, and they are a vital part of our philosophies, often holding sacred truths within them. Our stories also illustrate the importance of our relationships to each other, but also to the world around us. If I could have an audience learn one thing when it comes to storytelling, it's that it is a true artistry and it takes storytellers years and years to develop their style. And they are well respected in our communities because they hold the essential knowledge that we need to be good humans in this world.
Mm. I think about when we first were having conversations of this, one of the things that actually I heard from Fiona as we were this was that often in the curriculum, these stories get moved into folk tales, right? And then we've also had conversations around the role that native language plays in storytelling and what happens when we translate a story that originally is in a native language to English and what gets lost along the way, or misinterpreted. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that conversation or that idea.
I would say that is like one of my, especially when it comes to how stories and storytelling are currently taught by the majority of districts. It is relegated to like that mythology, the folk tale or cutesy stories that we can tell in a classroom, but not really taken seriously as an art form. And so I know that's one of my goals in this project is to really reevaluate how we're teaching the importance of storytelling, especially within a Wabanaki context and among Wabanaki storytellers, and making sure that storytellers are have the authority to be able to define what that means in their community themselves. So it is definitely a concern, and I run into it quite a bit in my work. So I'm excited to finally have a venue to really dig into that work and then create resources that can live on beyond just the scope of this stage program. So.
Yeah, one of the key things we've been talking about is that it's not just about the performance, but it's about the materials that we're creating for teachers and educators to support the before and after of seeing the performance, or if they aren't able to see the performance as well. We have a great story from the audience. I'm not a great story, excuse me, a great question from the audience that I think is a great fit in here, which is how can a theater prepare their community and make safe the environment for performance for storytellers and performers and artists? And again, I'm guessing there's no guidebook, but
There isn't, but I think if you ever have opportunities to, again, collaborate with other institutions in your community, to whether it's hosting a screening of Dawnland, which is a documentary that I highly recommend to everybody in attendance, to really have some good critical conversations about the history of this place in Maine, and to really help set the stage for people to come into your theater a little bit more prepared. Any opportunity that we can get to engage with people it's just so vital to the work that we do. Absolutely.
I was recently listening to a podcast that was talking to museum folks around decolonization. All My Relations was the podcast. And they were talking about the need to create space to smudge or to put offerings. And those are things that I'm, thinking about as well as been looking forward to having conversations about, of like, not just the context, but like the physical space that we're in.
Absolutely. Those are really important considerations, and making sure that you at least have space for people to bring up those considerations to you if they do need time alone, or if they do need a space to smudge would be really vital to this type of work.
Lots of great things to think about. So you've talked a little bit about how this aligns with the Abbey and the work that the mission of the institution. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, like, in particular, the work you've been doing around advocacy for L291, which, if folks aren't familiar, that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Starr, but I believe it was updated in 2001, mandating that all Maine schools teach Native Maine history, or Maine Native history, American history. I think there's been a renewed listening on the part of administrators and educators around the fact that this hasn't been happening and that it needs to happen. So yeah, I'm wondering if you could talk specifically about that work and then how this might further support that as well.
So in our circles, especially people that work with Wabanaki content, when we do refer to LD 291, it is a state law that necessitates the teaching of Wabanaki studies in Maine schools. Even though we keep referring to LD 291, there are other LD 291s because they change every year. So we are trying to shift it to talking about, the Wabanaki Studies mandate, to really kind of focusing in and really understanding what we're talking about when we're mentioning LD 291. So the Wabanaki Studies mandate is a big part of my work, whether it's through facilitating programs or curriculum development. The Abbey provides services to help districts fulfill their responsibility to this educational mandate. Most recently, I've been working with the Portland Public Schools in a cooperative agreement that they have with the Abbe Museum, helping with teacher trainings and also some technical support as they create a Wabanaki Studies curriculum. The work that's being done right now in conjunction with Fiona Hopper of Portland Public Schools and the Abbey is, I really believe it's going to become like the new standard of the Wabanaki Studies mandate. And from its infancy, it's really taken the task really seriously, and they've been really deliberate in their consideration of who's at the table advising them. And they're working directly with tribal stakeholders to ensure that each community is represented. Portland Public has definitely invested in this, and they realize that there isn't a checklist of things that you do in order to be more inclusive, but they're really taking the time to listen to tribal stakeholders. And I'm really proud to be part of that working team and offering my expertise in building inclusive and decolonizing curriculum. And I suspect that when we're done, we will have resources that will be able to be shared statewide. In this particular collaboration with Portland Ovations, I think when we come out of this and we have our educational resources, and we're going to have something, we're going to have educational resources again related to the arts and Wabanaki studies, which is definitely lacking at the moment. There just aren't that many reliable resources for doing this work in the arts. And I'm really excited that we get to be able to kind of fulfill more of our responsibilities to this mandate and really reach new classrooms and new teachers that want to incorporate Wabanaki studies.
Can you give, I don't know if it's easy to do this, but can you give an example of what it means to decolonize the curriculum? Like, because that's a big idea, right?
Yes, it
And
is.
it's not.
So when I'm thinking about decolonizing a curriculum, and again, like that's a huge statement to say, what I and how I try to approach it is really thinking specifically about the heart of what we're trying to teach our students, right? And in a lot of my examples, when I do give presentations, I think about how the glorification of empire building is really embedded in a lot of our in a lot of our in a lot of our lessons. So it's really getting at the heart of thinking about what it means to build an empire and why is it so celebrated within our culture. And so I like to at least get teachers and students thinking about why this is a glorification within our society. And so essentially that's what I like to do.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered that
No, that's
quite right.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're asking us to question what we're being taught and,
Yeah.
and why that's the knowledge that's being prioritized. So that's great. We have one question that is from Julie, and I can actually answer it. She asked if the performance will be available to adult audiences, and it is definitely available to all ages of audience. We just are thinking particularly about making sure that it is relevant to our young audiences in this moment. But we would love to see everyone on it. And again, we really are thinking particularly about our school audiences, which sometimes has different logistics around it. So that's why we're making sure we're prioritizing that, but it's open to everyone. And we hope that everyone will be able to attend, and that, you know, we're still figuring out even where and what it's going to look like in performance. So hopefully that will make more accessibility. So we're almost at time, and I wanted to close out, I know it went quickly, with a final question about imagination. Because I think when we think about change, a lot of great activists that I look up to talk about imagination as the way that we can think about what that change really could be and imagine something new. So I would love to know, this little itty bitty project, which is not that itty bitty bitty, but in the scheme of things, what do you imagine that its impact could be as in regards to both the partnership and the commission and the performance for both non-Indigenous and Wabanaki communities?
We touched on this already, but you know, storytelling and stories are broadly misunderstood, and I really believe that through this project we can have a huge impact on how storytelling is even seen. And I'm really hoping that this project will afford us to transform the narrative surrounding storytelling itself, to be seen as a legitimate art form. I'm really also I see the impact of the educational materials as being invaluable to educators who want to incorporate Wabanaki content into their classrooms. Um, And Maine classrooms are in dire need of more resources like this, and we can co-create these with Wabanaki artists so that they are centered at the heart of this project. And I don't necessarily want to speak for any Wabanaki storytellers as far as what they would like to see in their own home communities, but I think it is important to know that, you know, representation does matter, especially when it's on stage, and to I know as a young person, it would have been really amazing to see my own stories on stage and celebrated in a way like this, and honored in a way like this. And so I think it's going to have such incredible impacts both within Wabanaki communities, but then also within the Portland communities and surrounding communities that get to see this in person.
Thanks. I will just add that we can direct folks to Abbe Museum has an amazing educator hub. Are there any other, we had a question about like what other resources or where can we find resources? Is there anything else you'd like to add into that list?
Absolutely. So definitely visit abbemuseum.org in our educator hub. I also always highly recommend checking out Penobscot Nation's museum, or the Penobscot Nation Museum. They both have a website, and their nation also has a cultural resource department, and their website is really great. And then one of my favorites, passamaquoddypeople.com, has wonderful online resources for educators and for learners. And I also recommend the Dawnland Educators curriculum guide. Great first-person accounts that you can use in your classroom to talk about really difficult topics.
Yeah. Thank you. Those are great. We'll make sure, I think they've been dropped in the chat, and we'll make sure they go out in the email so that people can access them. Well, Starr, this has been so lovely. Is there anything else that you would like to add that we didn't get to?
No, but I do want to thank you for having me and for talking about this. This is a really exciting project that I know Chris, our executive director, and I are really proud to be part of this project. So.
Yeah, it's been so lovely getting to know both of you and thinking about the potential of this. I'm looking forward to more. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. There's so much more to talk about, and we'll have folks keep checking in as we keep sharing more as this develops. So thank you, Starr. Thank you for taking time to be here today. I also want to say thank you to Meryl and Chandler for being here as well, and to our audience. And for everyone, we hope to see you back here tomorrow at noon. We're going to be talking to Samuel James, who is a musician and a storyteller. Should be a great wrap up to a week of great conversations. Yeah, so with that, I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and we will see you in the Zoom room soon. Bye.